To perform an initial UCS cluster setup, the first thing you have to do is configure the primary fabric interconnect. The second thing you need to do is configure the secondary fabric interconnect. And then once that is completed, you can log into the cluster IP address. When we're configuring the primary fabric interconnect, we want to connect to the console port on the fabric interconnect. When we get to the console port, we're going to see a setup prompt asking us if we want to configure this via the console. We're going to say yes. In order to configure the primary fabric interconnect, we're going to have to answer some questions. The first thing we do is connect to the console port of the fabric interconnect. When we connect to that console port, it's going to ask us whether we want to configure this fabric interconnect via the GUI or console. In this case, we're going to answer console. It's then going to ask us if we would like to enter the setup mode, and we're going to type setup and press enter. It's going to ask us to confirm our selection, so we'll say yes. It's going to ask us whether we want to enforce strong passwords, and in a production environment you would say yes. In a lab environment you might say no. You then set the admin password and then tell the device if this fabric interconnect is going to be part of a cluster. In most cases you're going to say yes. We're then going to pick whether this is going to be the A or B fabric interconnect. The first one is probably going to be the A. We're then going to give the system a name. In this case it's UCS pod. We're then going to assign a unique address for fabric interconnect A, as well as specify the net mask and the default gateway. We're then going to enter a cluster IP address. From that point, it's going to ask us if we want to configure DNS, which we don't have to do at this time, whether we want to set a default domain name, no, and whether or not we're going to be part of UCS Central, which is again no. It will then show us a summary of the configuration to be applied, at which point you say yes if you want the configuration to apply, and you say no if you would like to start over. If you say yes and press enter, it's going to say applying configuration, and then you want to wait until you get back to the login prompt before you configure Fabric Interconnect B. If you don't wait and try to configure the secondary Fabric Interconnect, it may not detect that there is already a cluster configuration in place, and you will get a different prompt than what I'm about to show you. To log into the secondary Fabric Interconnect, we want to connect via a console cable. It will then say that it has detected the presence of a Fabric Interconnect and will ask if you want this device to be added to the cluster, at which point we say yes. We enter in the password that we configured on the first Fabric Interconnect. It then retrieves information about the cluster. It asks you for a physical IP address, a unique IP address for the second member of the cluster. In this case, A is 1, B is 2, and the cluster is 3. And then finally, it asks you if you would like to save the configuration. At this point we enter yes, our configuration is done. We can now browse to the .3 address, and we should get a screen that looks just like this. Please join me for the next lesson, configuring server, LAN, and SAN connectivity.